rules to the game are better for everyone. They're better for the people that win. They're better for the people that are coming up. They're better for everyone.
Yes, if that's right.
You have to have real structure and real rules,
Yes.
and that you're better off being a guy like Wayne Gretzky.
Yes.
Better off being a guy who's respected, who plays the game correctly and just does his best and really truly becomes a champion and loved by all because of it.
You're better off in every way.
Right.
Right, and that's the most stable. The other thing that's so cool about that, so imagine this. This is the antidote to moral relativism. Okay, so the first thing is that there are real problems, and hierarchical organizations can offer real solutions, socially and personally. So you can confront the problems courageously and you can solve them. So that's real. It ameliorates suffering and limits malevolence. And so there's nothing morally relative about that. The second is that sense of meaning that we discussed. That's not some philosophical second-order consequence of thinking. It's way deeper than that. That sense of meaning tells you when you're Vygotsky, the Russian psychologist, called that the zone of proximal development, which I believe is where the phrase the zone came from. And so in the zone of proximal development, this is what adults do with children, little kids that are learning to talk. Adults automatically talk to little children who are learning to talk at a level that slightly exceeds their current vocabulary. They do that without even knowing it. And that puts those kids in the zone, right? Because if you just talk baby talk to kids, then all they learn is baby talk. And if you just talk like an adult, then they don't understand a word you're saying. So you find this happy medium in between where the kid mostly understands what you're talking about and that you're pulling them forward. So that puts them in the zone. And that's a meaningful zone. And so you can feel the operation of that zone in your own life. That's what the Taoists are on about, because they say, well, the Tao is the way, right? And that's the pathway between chaos and order. That's meaning. And you can feel that in your life when you're deeply engaged in something. Like we have deeply engaging conversations, okay, which is part of the reason that we keep having them, and I think why they're popular. And we're not paying attention to how the clock is ticking or how time is flowing or even to the fact that we're doing what we're doing. We're just having a conversation. And it's meaningful, it's engaged, it keeps our eyes focused and our senses concentrated on what's happening. And the reason for that is that there's enough information flowing between us so that we're being slightly transformed as a consequence of the discussion, right? So we're both comfortable, we trust each other, we trust that the conversation is aimed at something that's of mutual benefit. We trust each other to tell the truth to the degree that we're capable of doing that. And then when you engage in this exchange of information, and to the degree that it's breaking you down a little bit and building you up in a different way, that's a little death and rebirth. There's constant little deaths and rebirths in a meaningful conversation. Then that keeps you alive and functioning. And that focuses you, like, that speaks to you so deeply that focus happens without any consciousness. And that's meaning. And that's that line between chaos and order. And that's real. That has nothing, and I would say, here's another thing that's cool. So that line between chaos and order, that's the same thing that's happening when you're playing a game properly, right? Because you're in the game and you're exercising your skill, but you're pushing it. But you're pushing it in a way that's also a benefit to your teammates and to the progression of the game as such, and to being a better general player. You're doing all that at the same time. And you're evolved with enough natural intelligence so that the sum total output of your nervous system says to you, you're in the right place at the right time doing the right thing. And that's what makes your life meaningful. And that's real. And I think it's more real than anything else. I think it's more real than suffering. I think it's more real than malevolence, because it's the antidote to both of those. And so the whole moral relativism issue for me is a non-starter. It's just wrong. There's lots of ways of interpreting the world, but there aren't very many ways of interpreting it optimally. And you can feel when you're doing that. It makes you stronger. And then the people that come to me after my talks and say, well, you know, I've been putting my life together. I've developed a vision. I've been trying to be more responsible. I've been trying to be more honest and put my relationships together. They're all sparkly-eyed because of this, or crying sometimes, because it's really had an impact on them at a deep level. They think, oh, wow, this actually works. It's like, yeah, it actually works. It's real. It's real. And I would say as well that that's associated with the idea of the deep Western idea of the logos, which is meaning in action and speech. So, you know, if we have a conversation that's meaningful, then that's a manifestation of the spirit of the logos. And that's the thing that destroys and recreates at the same time. Because you learn something, it destroys something, it destroys a little presupposition that you had that was erroneous and replaces it with something that's healthier. And every time you have a meaningful conversation, that happens. It's like a little tweak. Now, I wasn't quite right here. Click. That moves and something new takes its place. So, and that's a little death in rebirth instead of the catastrophic death in rebirth that you might have to have if you weren't paying attention. So that's all tied together. That's all tied together with that phenomena of meaning. And that's the same as the adoption of responsibility. That all ties together so nicely.
Yeah, the concept of meaning, like what is important, that it's so huge to people, but so fleeting. It's so difficult to, like, what is meaning? Well, you know, there's the simple ones, right? Like family and loved ones and companionship and community and finding something that you enjoy doing that, you know, you can do that seems bigger than you or bigger than yourself. But meaning, like the meaning of life. What is meaning? And it's one of the things that gives people so much existential angst. And I think is the cause of a lot of despair because there's no real answer.
Well, you can question it.
Yes.
But the thing is that that's one of the dangers of rationality is that, see, the Egyptians associated, the Catholics did this to some degree too, they associated rationality with a proclivity to malevolence. Partly because rationality tends to fall in love with its own productions. Intelligence has this like inbuilt arrogance. And the Egyptians in particular were really insightful. They tried to replace the idea of intelligence as the highest virtue with the idea of attention as the highest virtue. This is something Aldous Huxley knew. He wrote a book called Island. And Island was an island that was populated by, had a lot of birds on it, and the birds could talk, and all they did was say, pay attention, to remind everybody on the island to pay attention all the time. But you can undermine your sense of meaning and you can question it, but the best thing to do is to actually pay attention to when it manifests itself, because it's a phenomenon like color or like love or like beauty. It exists. It isn't something you create. It's something that you discover, and you can discover it. You just have to watch. Like you're ignorant about yourself. You think, okay, well, I've told my clinical clients to do this, and my students is watch yourself for 2 weeks. Just watch like you don't know who you are. And notice when you're doing something that you're engaged in. It's like you'll see it. Maybe it's only 10 minutes because your life is pretty out of balance, but you'll see that, oh man, I was engaged in something there for 10 minutes. It's like, why? What did you do that was right, that engaged you? You were in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing for a few minutes. What was it? What were the preconditions? There's this line in the New Testament. Christ says, the kingdom of God is spread across the earth, but men do not see it. And that's what it refers to, is that you wander into paradise now and then when you're engaged, when you're deeply engaged in something, but you don't notice it. You don't think, oh, look, I'm in the right place and everything's working out right now. It means I've got it right somehow. And then I need to practice being there more and more and more, which is, well, that's the appropriate thing to try to practice. And that's to come to some negotiated, what would you call it? It's to come to a negotiation with that intrinsic sense of meaning and to realize it as a fact rather than just as an opinion or something that's secondary. Because it's not. It's an
alien concept for people, though, to be so aware of who they are and what they're doing that they could recreate that. So when they do feel that feeling of meaning, that they could figure out a way to get back into that state, and what were all the extenuating circumstances, and where was my head at? What caused me to have this feeling like things were right?
Yes, well, it's like someone gives you a gift, and you think, well, I'd like that gift again. It's like, yeah, well, you have to figure out what it was that you did to deserve it, so to speak. And yeah, I know it requires a fair bit of careful reflection, but it also requires that ignorance, is you have to think, well, I don't know who I am. I'm going to find some things meaningful. What are they? They might not even be things you want to find meaningful. They might be things that you might even be ashamed of, because sometimes people are interested in things that they don't think that they should be interested in. Like maybe you'll have a guy who was this is kind of a cliche, but who was socialized to be a real tough guy, and he finds out that he's kind of interested in art or aesthetics. It's like, well, he's ashamed of that because maybe it's too feminine or whatever. Well, it doesn't matter, because that's actually that's actually something that's speaking to him from the core of his genuine being. He's going to have to pursue that. Or you might find, that someone who's really agreeable and kind of a pushover stands up to someone just once at work, says what they really think, and then they realize afterwards, wow, that was exactly right. Then they think, oh my God, I've decided when I was a little kid, maybe they had a harsh father, and they decided when they were 4, I'm never going to be angry in my whole life. There's something wrong with aggression. So they've gone out of their way their whole life to be free of conflict. Then they find out the one day they stand up for themselves that that whole domain that they'd parsed off as inappropriate actually contains exactly what they need to put themselves together. But you find what you need where you least want to look. That's the old alchemical dictum. Inster qualinus invenitur, right?